So what skills are actually required to do your own SEO? Well, the good news is that SEO is largely common sense and enormous attention to detail. There are some technical aspects to SEO, but if you're using something like WordPress, the great thing about WordPress is that WordPress has lots of what are called plugins. So for instance, if you want to do something technical like create what's called an XML sitemap, you might think, what on earth is that? Don't worry, I'll explain later, it's really easy. But if you want to create an XML sitemap within, say, a WordPress website, all you do is you install an XML plugin, which is free, and there's minimal configuration generally involved, and that's it, you're sorted. One of the things that's very important to SEO these days is what's called loading speed, and it'd be nice to implement something called gzip. You might think, again, what on earth is this? Well, you'll find that to implement gzip within WordPress, again, just involves installing a plugin. So if you're not using WordPress, I'd strongly recommend you think about either creating your brand new website in WordPress if you don't already have one, or if you already have a website, maybe think about transferring it and converting it over to a WordPress site. It might be a big job to do that, but the rewards are enormous because in WordPress it's just a fantastically good system. It's easy to use, it's very powerful, and from an SEO point of view, one of the great things about WordPress is that if you want to do anything sort of mildly technical, you don't really understand exactly how the technical bit works. You just install what's called a plugin, click, 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 sorted, it's done. And you know, there are just so many reasons why you should think about WordPress. But you know, it's just something to think about. As you can see on the second bullet point there, I mean, if you can use something like Microsoft Word and you're reasonably proficient with that, and you can select a file, drag it from, say, your laptop to a thumb drive, then that's about the limit of the sort of technical skills you're going to require. As I say, you don't need coding. You know, there's no programming involved. You don't need any detailed technical knowledge. It's just actually very, very simple. The real thing about SEO is you have to know what to do, and just as important, you need to know what not to do. And then you just, you know, it's really just attention to detail. That's really the key thing. SEO is about getting everything right as opposed to most things right. You know, if you're serious about wanting to get to the top of the first page, and as I say, nobody can guarantee it, I can't, nobody can. But if that's your goal, then bearing in mind there's about 200 factors that go into influencing who comes first, who comes last in the search engine results. You want to try and get as many of those 200 factors implemented and absolutely right on your website. So the key question is, how much time, you know, is actually involved? How long is it going to take? It really depends on, you know, if you've already got a website, how large the website is, how complex it is it an e-commerce site? You know, there's all sorts of things that go into the mix. But essentially, if you've already got a website, what you need to do is to really start at the beginning, start with the basics. And in this course, we'll start literally at the basics and then sort of work through. And just apply things slowly, don't rush it, take your time. And, you know, just think about every single aspect that's involved. But these days, I mean, a couple of days, that should really sort out most websites. And that's, you know, just without sort of breaking a sweat, really, you should be able to do your SEO on most websites in a couple of days. That's what's called the on-site SEO, the factors that, you know, affect SEO that are actually within your site. There is another aspect to SEO, what's called off-site SEO, which involves sort of social media and you know, other websites and what have you, and that's a different thing altogether. But certainly with the on-site, it's actually very straightforward. So as you can see, typically I'd suggest sort of 3 to 6 months. That's the sort of time scale you should be thinking of as a minimum. You know, for even better results, maybe 9 to 12 months. Again, if you looked back at that Google document that we examined earlier on, you will see in there that they do recommend, you know, sort of a time scale of 3, 9 months, something like that. If the goal is to get you onto the first page, then you could be talking about a year possibly. It depends how competitive your particular sector is. The good news is, in some cases, it's really easy. I mean, let's say you've got a fish and chip shop in a small Australian suburb. So near me, there's a suburb called Ocean Reef. It's got exactly one chip shop in it. So if they wanted to come up first for a phrase like Ocean Reef Fish and Chip Shop, that would be remarkably easy to do because there's basically no competition. If, on the other hand, you're something like a chiropractor, and there seems to be a chiropractor in just about every corner these days, that's a lot more competitive, and that's going to take a lot longer to get to the top of the search results. And even then, there's no guarantee. It's an old expression, knowledge is power, but quite often I have people coming on my SEO training courses and they go away all fired up, and then of course they get bogged down because they're running a business, and maybe a couple of months later they'll ring me and say, oh, I was on one of your training courses, any chance you could do the SEO for me? The trouble is a lot of people go to SEO companies, as I mentioned in previous chapters, and they go in kind of blind and they just kind of don't really know the questions to ask and all that. So what you could do at the end of the course, once you understand SEO, is then you could go to an SEO company if you didn't want to do it yourself, but at least you'd be armed with the knowledge, you'd be armed with the right information, the right questions to ask, and basically you'll be able to distinguish sort of good advice from rubbish, shall we say. And as I say, unfortunately, there are a lot of bad companies in this business.